Hi, everybody. I am really excited to introduce our guest speaker tonight, Tom Peters. Tom Peters is the CEO of TAP Information Services, and he does consulting and projects of all types with all kinds of libraries. Alliance Library System does a lot of projects with him, and I've worked with Tom for 12 years on different projects, and he was one of the first librarians I know to get involved with ebooks back in 1998, 12 years ago, way before, you know, mobile library services are the way they are now. And he can tell you the story of how he got involved in ebooks. It's a funny story. And then I also wanted to share with you, we did an early project in 2001 with a couple of academic libraries and ebooks. And we wrote an article in Library Journal called Ebooks Go to College. And one library used a dedicated ebook reading device, the Rocket ebook, which is quite a bit like the Amazon Kindle. And then the other college used the Franklin ebook man, which was defunct less than a year after we tried it, but it was a device that had the PDA plus the ebook reading plus a lot of the functions that you find on today's PDAs, and we were speculating about what device would win out, and it turns out that almost 10 years later we have the dedicated reading devices like the Kindle, but we also have the devices like the Sony e-reader that can do a lot more than just the e-reading. So, Tom, we're really glad to have you, and I'll turn it over to you.
Okay, thanks much, Lori. Let me just do a quick audio check. Can people hear me? Yay, okay. I'm going to try to, I'm actually in Portland for the PLA conference. It starts tomorrow, and I'm in a hotel on a Wi-Fi connection. I'm going to try to keep it simple here, and you guys can text chat any questions or comments you have, and I think I'll just kind of keep my mic locked on if that's okay, and just kind of try to advance my slides and not do anything too fancy here. So thanks very much for inviting me to speak, and I'm always glad to meet with Lori and Jeremy's classes and talk about stuff. Tonight I'd like to talk about what I call portable e-reading, which, as Lori said, has been really possible for the last 12 years, but I think we're really now in the midst of the real revolution. The late 90s and first few years of the current millennium were kind of the false revolution. There's a lot of hype around that, but hadn't really taken off yet. And now I think we're really underway here. So I'm really excited that we've done this. Just so you know, the story of my introduction to ebooks was Lori had bought a Rocket ebook, and we lived both in Illinois at that time, and she mailed it over to my house for me to try it. And as luck would have it, or as fate would have it, the morning of before the device arrived, I had stepped on a nail and had to stay in bed for a couple of days, and so I was in a lot of pain, and you know, stepping on a nail is no fun. And I was in, yeah, Vicki, ouch is right, and so I was in bed, sort of nursing my sore foot, and my wife brought up the mail and said, "Well, here's this packet for you," and it was the Rocket ebook. So I spent an entire weekend reading Alice in Wonderland on a Rocket ebook, and I was just enthralled. I thought that this was the coolest thing, and so I've been very interested in the whole ebook market and developments and things since then, and I'm really enthused about what's happening, although I do have some concerns as well about what's currently happening in with e-reading and the whole portable ebook movement. What I'd like to do for the next few minutes is just talk to you about some of the ideas that I have. And I have to admit, I probably thought more about reading in the last few years than I did in my entire life prior to that. And I've always been a big reader, but I never really thought about reading and what's going on when you're reading and what are some of the ancillary activities. I just sort of did it rather than think about it. So I've been thinking about this a little bit, and I want to share some ideas with you. So first of all, what is reading? And I'm not maybe advocating Wikipedia, but I go look at the Wikipedia definition. And here's kind of the gist of what was on there. They refer to reading as a complex process of, oh, thanks, Bud Mashria, if you're doing that. Thanks much. Process of decoding symbols for the intention of deriving and or constructing meaning. So it's a complex process of decoding symbols of any sort, I guess, for the intention of deriving meaning and or constructing meaning. I'll come back to that, whether you're deriving meaning from a text or constructing meaning as you read a text. But I sort of developed my own tentative definition, and I think of reading as interacting with primarily alphanumeric text. And again, I'll come back to why primarily and not exclusively. Thus constituting a complete, complex, satisfying sensory, cognitive, and emotional experience. So it's a complex thing to read, as we all know, if you just think about it for a little bit. But it is satisfying. It does involve the senses. It does involve cognition. And there often is an emotional response to it, especially when you're reading fiction, but also with nonfiction. I can often be very pleased by an argument or a historical scene depicted in a history book or something like that, or I can also be very frustrated or angry with the way an argument is constructed in a work of nonfiction. So I think there's those three components: sort of sensation, cognition, and emotive kind of responses to reading. So let's talk first about reading as a sensory intake. You're ingesting this information. And again, I guess some people argue that maybe there aren't five senses after all, but when I was growing up, by golly, there were five senses. And so I thought about this, and really visual reading. When most people think of reading, they think of visual reading. You're reading print, something that's printed on paper, or more and more now digital content. But you're using your eyes to intake, that is your sensory intake channel, if you will. And so again, that's kind of the visual reading has sort of the primacy, I guess, for most people. That's what they think of. But I think that one of the really exciting things in the last few years has been what I call auditory reading, or listening to an audiobook. I think it's a very good way to read, and I'm sighted myself. I do work with blind and low vision users, but I'm sighted myself, so I read visually. I read auditorily as well. Of course, there's analog reading, the old tapes and whatnot, but also, again, this is primarily going digital now. Auditory reading can be prepackaged, so it could be on a CD. You could buy a CD. You can buy those little play-away devices that are quite popular. You can also do downloadable digital audio books are a big thing. I actually coordinate a multi-state service called Unabridged, which is a downloadable digital audiobook service for blind and low vision individuals. And it's also possible, of course, to stream audio over the internet, such as we're trying to do now from this hotel lobby. Then, of course, there's tactile reading. So the sense of touch is available to every reader, and the feel of the book and the smell of the book are certainly part of that, but you can actually use the sense of touch as a way to ingest, sensory intake, a text. The only tactile reading form I know of is Braille. Braille is available, again, also printed or digital. There's actually digital Braille. But there may be other tactile reading methods and languages and whatnot. I just don't know of them, but Braille is certainly one that's been around for a while. And as Ender points out in TextChat, there's also real-time audiobooks, or what they call text-to-speech, where, for example, like on the Kindle, or there's a lot of software out there that allows books to be read out loud to you. And I think actually that's a great thing. And I think that in the digital era, one of the things that I think I've been sort of working on, what I call a reader's Bill of Rights for the digital era. I think that readers ought to be able to decide how they want to, what sensory intake channel they want to use for a particular text. So, for example, in the case of the Kindle, you could read it visually for a while, and then if your eyes get tired or whatever, or you're commuting, or it's evening and you want to relax in a different way, you could switch over to having the audio intake method through the text-to-speech function. So I think that really readers ought to have the right to decide how they want to intake it. And then, you know, this sounds kind of crazy, but there's actually been a little bit of work done on olfactory reading, where your sense of smell actually comes into it. And people that study senses say that actually the sense of smell is one of the most evocative things one of your most evocative senses, and that a smell can actually bring back very vivid memories. For example, one time I smelled someone was wearing some perfume that my long dead aunt had used to wear. And when I smelled it, I immediately recognized the scent, and it brought back immediately all these memories of my aunt who had been dead for years. And so I can tell you that the olfactory sense is a very strong sense, very powerful sense. And there's actually an olfactory web. I put in the link here that you can go read up a little bit on a little bit of work that's been done on the olfactory web, scratch and sniff web, I call it. And then just to round out the 5 traditional senses, there's always what I call gustatory reading, which would literally devour a good book. And there's actually a group, it's an international group, bookstoeat.com, that has an international edible book festival, I think they call it, where they actually make things that look like books and I think maybe contain text, who knows how they work, but you can eat them. So even though, you know, that's kind of funny maybe, that maybe there's some future for gustatory reading. But the point I'm trying to make is that, you know, most people, when you think of reading, you think of visual reading, but I think we need to be a little more inclusive and expansive in thinking about what reading really entails. And I've even been wondering if, I'm not a big gamer myself, but if some of these complex games that people play, online games, is it really sort of better to describe what they're doing as reading the game than playing the game? I'm not sure about that, but you know, so I think that the notion of reading is sort of evolving, at least in my sense. Now, one thing I want to get on my soapbox just for a second and exhort you not to be reading snobs. I hear people and read about people that, some people argue that reading visually a book printed on paper is the best or only true reading experience. That they just think that any other type of reading is sort of like false reading or slumming. You'll hear people say that, oh, listening to the audiobook is not really reading the book. You're slumming. You're just sort of cutting corners, and it's not as immersive an experience as reading it visually. I'm just asking us all to be a little more tolerant. We all have our favorite ways to read. I don't want to say that you can't have a favorite way to read, but I just want us to try to be inclusive and not be reading snobs. And then I think there are a few hyper snobs out there, I call them, that their idea of the only true reading is visually reading a hardbound printed book that you personally own, not a library copy, in an easy chair, a very comfortable easy chair, with a glass of wine, not a beer, not a glass of bourbon, or anything, but a glass of wine, 5 Corinthians 11, right, James, is the only true reading. And so I guess my point is that we have this tradition in the West anyway, and it's really quite a recent tradition, to be honest with you, from what I know of the history of reading, where you're alone, you're reading a printed book, and you've got a nice, comfortable chair, and you've got a good source of light, external source of light. And that is often what we might call the Platonic ideal of reading. And I think that might be sort of the modern way of reading. But now that we're in the postmodern era, I think we need to think a little bit more broadly and more sort of inventively about, well, what really is reading, and what is there a hierarchy of reading, or are all types of reading equally valid? Okay, so for me, the bottom line of what I'm trying to say to you tonight, that I do think that reading digital books visually, both visually and auditorily, on portable devices probably will become the next best thing since sliced bread. I just read something today on a flight out here to Portland that there's a guy who sort of follows the publishing market, and his best estimate is that right now, for newly released, what he calls e-bookable books, books don't have a lot of tech, don't have a lot of images and things like that, not art books or textbooks or things like that, that e-books constitute about 5% of sales. If you look across the entire publishing, all the publishers, for some publishers more, some publishers less. He thinks that the growth rate, though, year over year is quite phenomenal, like 4%, 400% growth rate. So he thinks that within a year or so, we might see 20% of all new sales of books be electronic books. And he thinks by 2012, it might get up to about 25%. And he thinks when it gets up to that level, it's going to be disruptive, I think was the word that he used. It's really going to change the way publishers behave and whatnot. So I really think that there's a bright future for digital reading, electronic reading, especially on portable devices, whether the iPad makes tablet PCs what everybody has to have, or I read right now on my BlackBerry, I read on my netbook. There's a lot of different devices out there, but I think that what we're going to see is a pretty bright future for digital reading, especially on portable electronic devices. I do think the real true portable e-reading revolution is now underway. And of course, many large corporations, all these, Amazon, Apple, Sony, Google, Barnes & Noble, others, some startups as well, are investing in and marketing portable e-reading content systems and services. So the money is starting to get there now, too, and there's been pretty big investment in portable e-reading. And the thing I worry about, and I try not to be what I call a henny-penny librarian, oh, the sky is falling, oh, woe is me, oh, my profession is in dire straits, Mark is dead, oh, what shall we do? But I really do worry that if we looking down the road a few years and we see that, oh, let's say 25–30% of all reading that's done is done on portable e-reading devices, I just don't see libraries and library vendors very well positioned right now for this emerging market, and I think we're almost already in catch-up mode. Okay, so let's circle back to this sort of basic idea of reading, and another thing I've been thinking about is, well, why do we read? And I think there's three main reasons why people read. One, of course, is school-related things, reading. So from the time you learn how to read, you're really kind of looking at, I'm not sure I'm going number two first here, because it makes more sense in sort of the life cycle of a typical reader. They first learn to read in school, and school-related reading is really a major part of what you do from throughout your formal educational years. And that's a certain type of reading and a valid form of reading. And then when you enter the world of work, you do a lot of reading as well, especially in information-intensive kind of work, whether you're in an office situation or cubicle situation, you do a lot of reading. And most of this reading is done on screen, of course, now. And then there's this whole thing of pleasure reading or avocational reading, which is kind of the focus of my ideas that I'm sharing with you tonight. I don't think pleasure quite captures it, because some avocational readers are very into a subject, whether it's World War II or Abraham Lincoln or whatever their avocational interest is. They are very avid readers in that discipline, and they are, they read more than most formal students involved in formal education would read in a particular subject area. So to call it pleasure reading, I think, is a little bit a bit of a misnomer. So I call it avocational reading. You're not doing it for school. You're not doing it for work. You're doing it for other reasons. And I suppose a fourth one is kind of incidental reading. I think of like road signs as being, you read road signs, but you don't sort of, I don't know if anyone says, you know, I'm going to relax a little bit and go out and read some road signs. You don't sort of seek out road signs as a reading experience, but when you encounter a road sign, you do read it. And there's often symbols and also maybe some written text on a lot of road signs. Maybe cereal boxes are another thing where you're waking up in the morning and you're sort of reading the cereal box, not really intentionally. You're not looking for a page-turner cereal box, but you're just kind of reading it to be reading. I maybe call that incidental reading as a fourth type of reading. So who reads for pleasure? The National Endowment for the Humanities has been doing a series of reports about the reading habits of adult Americans. And believe it or not, in any given year, only a slight majority of adult Americans read anything for pleasure that is not related to work and or school. And other than words on the TV, cereal boxes, road signs, that kind of stuff. Only a slight majority of Americans in any given year read anything as a part of avocational reading. The actual statistic from the most recent report, which came out in January of 2009, the data were actually gathered in 2008, is a slight 50.2% majority of adult Americans, approximately 113 million, engaged in literary reading in 2008. And I gave you the link there if you want to go read the report. And that's actually a slight increase over previous reports in this series. One of the most famous reports was titled Reading at Risk, where they were showing how in previous years the percentage of adult Americans that were reading was actually declining, and there was a lot of reason, a lot of speculation of why that was occurring. The onslaught of media opportunities, home videos, the internet, lots of reasons. But their most recent sort of survey, snapshot survey, found that it's actually going up a little bit, but still barely more than half of adult Americans read anything avocationally in any given year. So one way to categorize the adult American reading public, I think, as we look at this ebook initiative revolution that's underway, is you get your early adopters. They probably already own a Kindle or a Sony Reader, or they've got a iPad on order. Last time I looked, there's been about 1.5 million units sold. It's probably higher now of these portable e-readers. Or they read ebooks on their mobile phones or netbooks. Like I said, yeah, I wish I had. I do too, Andrew. I wish I had an iPad on order. But I read on my BlackBerry, which is a pretty good experience. And I've just purchased a netbook, so I'm reading some ebooks on that as well, which is a good experience. And then you've got maybe the other extreme is what I call never adopters. They see no compelling reason to switch from printed books to ebooks. Some of these never adopters are, sometimes I'll hear comments like, well, really the computer revolution is kind of a bust. It hasn't increased productivity at all. We're just kind of frittering away our lives online, and gee, couldn't we go back to the pre-computer days? I mean, I hear comments like that every once in a while, and not necessarily from elderly people. It's amazing how there seems to be sort of a pockets of resistance, if you will, to the whole computer revolution, the network revolution. They just they don't see no compelling reason to make that switch. And then the third group I would call the middlers. This is a large middle group between these two extremes. They're not averse to e-reading, but they may be a little bit uncertain and uncomfortable about the whole prospect of e-reading. And this may be the core clientele for ebook services, especially through public libraries. I think that public libraries could have and are having an impact on helping these middlers to sort of explore the new realm of electronic reading, especially on portable devices. So don't underestimate the power of the middlers. And my Exhibit A here, if this were a court of law, I would introduce as Exhibit A the Playaway device. If you haven't had a chance to try or experience a Playaway device, I would encourage it. It's a very interesting thing because, there are portable MP3 players out there, and you can download digital audiobooks, Overdrive, NetLibrary, a lot of different sources, audible.com kind of things. But what Playaway did was they kind of tapped into the power of the middlers. So they preloaded digital audiobook onto a device. So there's nothing to download or transfer. Very simple device, easy to start and operate. There's no moving parts. It's very easy for libraries to lend these things out. Every report I hear back is that libraries are very pleased with the kind of circulation rates they're seeing on these Playaway devices. I think of them as like Pony Express devices. They don't last long. I mean, I don't see the Playaway era lasting long, but they get us from the time when you're delivering mail on foot to the time that the mail was delivered by trains. And so the Pony Express played a real crucial role as a transitional technology. And I sort of see these things like the Playaway as helping people to transition from analog audio recordings and books printed on paper to truly digital, portable kind of reading experiences. So the big assumption that I'm just throwing out there, and it is an assumption, I admit it, is that in the near future, or who knows how long, maybe 10 years, maybe 5 years, who knows, perhaps most of reading for pleasure, avocational reading, will be done digitally on portable devices. Now, I don't want to slight reading on desktop computers of ebook content that's found via searchable databases. We all know these databases. LIBR is one that comes to mind, and they really sort of treat books as databases, where they get the book in there, and then you're able to search it, and you're sort of able to zero in on just those parts of typically nonfiction works that are of interest to you, whatever you're working on, a paper or a research project or just pursuing an interest. But I remember seeing some statistics that NetLibrary reported that the average length of time that anybody stayed logged into NetLibrary is like 14 minutes. So people aren't using these ebook databases as for extended reading. They're just going in to search what they can find and then use it, cite it, and get on with their paper or whatever they're working on. But to me, portable reading for avocational pleasure reading is a whole different ball of wax. And I think that libraries currently are doing much better on what I've got listed here as number 2. Than they are in number 1. So I think that we need to sort of maybe try to focus more on reading for pleasure and how we can serve people who want to read for pleasure. The thing that I find is when ALA was in Chicago last summer, I made a point of going around to all the vendors I could identify that were offering ebooks, and I asked them about, can you put this on, can you have a portable e-reading experience with your content? So I went around to like My iLibrary from England Digital, eBrary, Baker and Taylor, and most of them responded, yeah, you could do it, but it's not really designed for that. So they sort of designed their systems for more that desktop database search kind of experience, which is fine, but I just don't think it meets this other type of reader need. I should give you an update, though, that Baker and Taylor is about ready to launch a service called Blio, B-L-I-O. It should launch in the next couple of weeks or so. I think if you go to blio.com, you can actually sign up to get an email notification of it. The person behind the design of it's software and content. It's supposed to be sort of like device agnostic, so that you could, when it's all up and running, you can read your, good, Adrian. Yeah, I signed up to find out about it. I heard from some representative from Baker Taylor that they're predicting now early April. Thanks, Blio Reader. Yeah, blioreader.com. Early April, I think they're going to launch this thing. Ray Kurzweil is the guy who really kind of behind the software. One of the pre-release commentary I'm reading about is that it's really going to be really nice e-reading software, and it's supposed to be able to play on just about any device. So I'll be interested to see what Baker and Taylor does with that. So it's starting to make some movement in that area. I'm going to have to speed up here because I guess I'm running a little bit long, being too long-winded here. The other problem, sort of the flip side problem, is that most of these established and mainstream portable e-reading services are basically ignoring libraries and the library model in their business plan. So Amazon with their Kindle is definitely focused on the direct-to-end user services. And I have to admit, I use Kindle editions, and it is a very seamless, fast, easy service to use. I mean, they've really thought through all the nuts and bolts of doing this. And so I don't own a Kindle. I actually just downloaded the free Kindle software both on my BlackBerry and on my netbook. But they really have a nicely integrated, easy-to-use service, I've got to admit. But it's really focused on the end user. And then Google, and I don't want to bash Google, but they really seem to view libraries as almost like third world countries where you just go in and sort of extract the raw materials and then leave the country. They seem to be going into libraries and just sort of extracting us. We're the raw source of a raw resource, printed books to be scanned, and they're just going in and scanning these things. And I'm not sure what interest they'll have in libraries once they finish that big scanning project that they have underway with all their partner libraries. So they don't seem to be too interested in the library model. And of course, Google Editions is going to launch here in 2010, and still trying to figure out exactly how it's going to work, but it's going to be kind of browser-based. But I don't see any kind of institutional sales to libraries and other organizations happening at the Google front. Barnes & Noble also seems to be uninterested in what libraries are doing. I do note, though, that their Nook device does have a lend to a friend function so that you can let a friend read your Nook book, but it's disabled while you have it loaned out to your friend. And I think you can only do one loan to one friend. So choose carefully which friend you're going to lend your Nook to. I do also have to note that Sony and Overdrive have a joint marketing agreement, but in talking to the folks from Overdrive, I'm not really sure that it's a tight joint marketing agreement. It might be one of those things where they announce it, but nothing major really happens there. I don't know. Okay, so yeah, Andy, you're right. Yeah, it lends the text to from one Nook to another. I don't know exactly how you transfer it, if it's through a Wi-Fi connection or what, but yeah, it's from one Nook owner to another. And my understanding is that once you loan it to your friend, you can't read it then until you get it back from them. And I think you can only do it once per title, if I remember correctly. Maybe they've changed that, but if it's only like one loaning per title. Okay, so to me, the trillion-dollar question is, should libraries, as cultural institutions for the public good, which I think they are, especially public libraries, fight and claw their way in a position to exert a long-term positive influence over the emerging portable e-reading market? And I think the answer to that is a resounding yes. I think that we really do have to work hard to make sure that libraries and the library lending model and all the underpinning technology and economics and implicit social contract and all the other things that make libraries such wonderful cultural institutions don't get shoved to the wayside as the e-reading revolution continues apace. Okay, so let's kind of shift gears here and talk about what I consider the elements of a portable reading experience. And I sort of see three basic elements. You got to have content. You got to have a device, which is sort of an amalgam of hardware and software, and you've got to have some sort of distribution and delivery system. So first of all, content. So there's always I don't know what it is about human nature, but whenever something new happens, then you always have to have a format war. And it's the same thing with portable e-reading. So you've got like PDF, EPUB, Kindle's got their own format. There's a lot of formats floating around there. From what I can tell, reading and observing the industry, EPUB seems to be the emerging winner in this thing. But Google Editions is trying to sidestep that whole EPUB versus PDF thing and doing a browser-based way of delivering their content. So I don't know exactly what it's going to be, XML, or I don't know what it is going to be. And of course, you need a device of how much the content can be read. You need to think about the size of the collection. You need to think about the nature of the collection being offered through your ebook service. front list stuff, mid list, back list, public domain, what subject strings you have, different languages, all that kind of stuff. It's sort of collection development 101. You got to think about your delivery system and your metadata. DRM is what we love to hate, but it's kind of out there and we have to deal with it. And of course, the price of the content for individuals, institutions, and then also you have to think about the media that's embedded in the e-reading experience, or what we want to call media. And this is a big question. What role is embedded media, whether it's images, videos, other things that are going to be embedded, that are being embedded in a lot of these portable e-reading experiences. So, for example, you got a thing called the VOOK, VOOK, V-O-O-K. It's an ebook with embedded videos and social media tools. If you want to go take a look at it, it's www.vook.com. There's also the Alex Reader, which has a dual screen. On the top, it's more of a traditional ebook kind of display, e-ink kind of display, and below is more kind of a browser kind of display. And you use them in tandem to interact with the content. So kind of a lot of interesting things happening with text plus media as we get into this revolution. From what I can tell, the major ebook vendors right now are the Internet Archive claims to have 1.6 million titles in EPUB and DAISY formats. DAISY is a markup language that makes it easy for blind and low vision users to access the content. Sony Reader claims to have over 1 million titles, mainly Google Books in the public domain, so it's kind of a different kind of collection. Barnes & Noble claims to have over 1 million titles. Last time I checked, Google Editions is about 600,000. Amazon Kindle, 350,000. All of these are not really serving the library market. All those up there. Overdrive, last time I checked with them, they claim to have about 160,000 unique ebook titles. So Overdrive and NetLibrary, compared to these other ebook content vendors, are really kind of small potatoes. Okay, also with devices, you need to think about what's the overall size and weight of the device. You know, and not one size is not going to fit all. We've got, you know, smallish devices like my BlackBerry, pretty small screen, medium devices like the traditional Kindle, and then you've got these tablet PCs and the XL kind of things. And of course, screen size is a major component of what you can do with presenting the ebook text. And the Hearst Corporation is, I forget what their initiative is called, maybe somebody can help me out there, is actually working on a project to make like newspapers and magazines on a tablet type device that makes the presentation of that kind of content compelling on a portable e-reading device. There's all these types of screens out there. You've got e-ink, you've got touch screen. There's a really interesting group called Pixel Key that's working on some interesting technology. There's screen technology is kind of R&D and screen technology right now is fast and furious. I'm trying to hurry up here. Battery type and longevity, how long you can read the thing. The great thing with e-ink is that you've got a lot of page turns because there's no ongoing power drain. Once it's refreshed that page and presented to you, basically there's no power until you turn the page next time. So the only thing that's drawing down the power is the actual page turn on the e-ink display. All these different devices support different file types, so be careful when you're out there in the market. Make sure you know it's going to play the type of file type that you want. And a sort of a smaller subset of that point is the ability to load locally created content. If that's going to be important to you and your users, you want to make sure that you can do that. And then there's the last bullet here is all this ancillary stuff, I call it. Which may be really kind of core and key to whether e-reading sort of really takes off to the next level. So you got things like an embedded dictionary, you got highlighting, note-taking. We already mentioned text
Okay, that might be a good opportunity to take a little bit of a break and gather our thoughts and think of questions for Tom when he gets back. So far, what have you guys thought about the presentation and what comments?
Recording started.
I'm basically locking the library down, the library record model, information for those lecture users. We're going to use your article I recommend, and last something it needs to sometime. Find an office for Chico Sakasaki. The title of the article is Tracking Up Context. Brought up with that. I recommend that Kakatani talking about the kind of downside and concerns that people have had about what's happening with our information we'll be able to judgment on things before.
Tom, just a minute. Tom, just a minute. I guess we are not able to hear, so just a minute. Let me see what they'd like to do, or maybe I put it on the speaker for myself in just a minute. I just wanted to know, do you think this will work, or do you think I should put the cell phone on a speaker and try it again?
Okay, I'm sorry about all the problems we've been having, but okay, I think I'm still connected here. Okay. Okay, just one last thing I want to do. Let me go to the end here, and not that one. I just want to mention something. The first article that I've got listed there by Michiko Kakatani, I guess pronounced that person's name. Yeah, I agree, Andrew. It was a really good article. It appeared in last Sunday's New York Times, and there's the URL. I'd really recommend, everybody recommends, yeah, I got to read this article. But he really does a good job of sort of synthesizing a lot of, I would call, problems that people have identified with the way we interact with information now. And he talks about a lot of different, I don't know if it's he or she, talks about a lot of different problems, but I call it the dark side of reading's future. He cites several people that talk about how reading is becoming increasingly marginalized by our culture and society. There's a whole question of intellectual property, who owns what. There's several people that are wondering if we're just sort of mashing up and remixing, sort of cannibalizing our culture and engaging in navel gazing. I already mentioned how a lot of people are getting into the habit of criticizing before or even as they read, not after. And this whole idea of the hive mind, that communal thinking through social networking and online collectivism, it may not be the best for us as a species. So I want to thank everybody for attending online today, and I don't know if we have a few minutes for Q&A, but I know you guys got other things to do, and we're already running a little bit late, but I'll turn off my mic here and let people ask questions that they want.
When you were when we were doing the technical stuff, some people were summarizing your talk and brought up the point that their ILSs and OPACs had a difficult time integrating with the content. So I'm curious the kinds of journeys and technical problems that the libraries have dealing with this mushy new kind of content, and what you've seen about that, and if you have any advice or comments, or what do you think about that?
Yeah, it's really tough for libraries because, we can't, if you're an individual consumer, you can say, well, I know the Kindle is a closed system, but by golly, it works, it meets my needs, and so everybody else go hang. Libraries can't do that. They have to be sort of device and system agnostic, and we sort of have the long tail of technology in libraries too, where, we still have, 8-track tape. And microfilm and microfiche and microforms, microcards in still some libraries. So it's a real challenge for libraries to really provide access to all this technology. And I guess the bottom line is, with all this, anybody still hearing me? Padmashri, anybody hearing me? Okay, great. I think it's just tough for libraries to, the nature of digital information is you have to have some sort of access device. And there's just such a rapid evolution of access devices that poor libraries are really have a hard time providing access to all this stuff, and are going to have a difficult time, years hence when we collectively moved beyond Kindles, but there's all those Kindle editions sort of floating around there that people want to get access to. So I think it's going to be a big problem for libraries. It is a big problem for libraries. It's always been a problem whenever you need any kind of technology or device to access information.
Tom, I have a quick question for you. Now that you're on, people may not realize that one of the reasons that we're doing digital collections in the course, besides the fact that it's an interesting way to gather and capture the information, is in support of a conference series that you're doing. And our original intentions was to have a set of resources and to give the students a task that was real world, that they would create a set of resources that would be interesting to people who are attending your conferences. So we have 3 digital collections in development. We're just in the middle of the second one, and I'm curious, if you were to offer digital collections to your conference, what would they be like? How would they be used? How would people use these in your conferences? Because these students here on the line are the ones generating real world examples and usable digital collections. So
yeah, that's a real good question, and sort of 2 thoughts come to mind. First thought is, I think we're still kind of trying to figure out what online conferencing is good for, and sort of what the affordances of it are. And as we often do, when something new comes along, we sort of just try to translate what we know, or transform what we know, transport what we know to the new technology. And so a lot of online conferences basically follow the same basic format of an in-person conference. We have the opening keynote speaker, and then you have a panel session, then you have the session on this, and you have breakout sessions. And I think that as we get farther into this, online conferences are going to sort of develop or take off on a tangent of their own. And I know Lori and I, when we work on these conferences, we're already in conversation with people about, well, what can we do a little bit differently that would be very difficult or impossible to do at an in-person conference that we could do online and sort of add value to it. So I really like the idea of, making it not only some guy talking to you like I've been doing this evening, but more, sharing resources. And a little of this happened already tonight, where people were sharing URLs and providing information. And so it's more of a multimodal interaction. Yeah, Lori's telling me. mean, there's just a lot of different ways of doing things where you can do, you can show like 20 slides in 20 seconds per slide, 20 slides, kind of rapid fire kind of presentation, not this long-winded one that I've been giving you tonight. And sort of thinking through what works and what works online in a way, and we're going to try this thing in the digital world. The other thing that comes to mind is, as I mentioned, I've been involved in this unabridged downloadable digital audiobook service, and one thing that people really like about the service is that we're able to offer the audiobooks at the same time that the print books become available. So the release date is the same, and so blind and low vision users really, they line up to get immediate access to the collections. And I've sort of gotten, I've generated ire in some of my colleagues when I've commented in the past that if we as a profession only spent a tenth of the energy and time that we spend on archival issues, how to make sure that we have access to information, if not in perpetuity for as long as possible, if we spend a tenth of that in trying to get the information out there as quickly as possible, as an indication with these audiobooks becoming available right when the printed books are available, that would be a great service. And so the kind of immediacy, I've sort of talked about the dark aspect of, we rush to judgment, if you will. We don't even necessarily finish a sentence and say, oh, I don't agree with that, or you don't finish the novel before you're criticizing the novel or discussing it with your friends and colleagues. But I think also this immediate access to content is definitely where, a lot of people are really appreciating that kind of thing. And as I mentioned also, the fact that you can download a Kindle edition and then these other portable ebook devices in less than a minute. The first time I did it, I thought, oh, it must have aborted or something. It was so fast. But I think we're going to get kind of used to having that immediate access to information through online conferences. So I really like the idea of not only having people talk to you in slide sets, but also other types of resources that are available to you, sort of like mini collections developed for conferences is a great idea.
Well, Tom and Lori, do you want to wrap up, or do you want me to summarize?
Sure. And then you add your thoughts. Tom, thank you very much. I think it's an exciting future, but the problem is it's really hard to keep up. I know I've been trying to keep up with technology for 15 years or so, and there's just more and more out there, and it changes so quickly. As I said before, we're going to have an online conference May 11th on ebooks and audiobooks that Tom is organizing and that you can attend for free. And I'll send that information out to the group as we get closer to the date. So thank you very much, Tom, and thank you, Jeremy, for your great questions and the class for great discussion. I'll turn it back to you, Jeremy.